kind of basic idea in the United States, but it can be brought to other.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Philippe.
please.
That's a wonderful way to wrap everything up. Appreciate it. So now I want to open it up to you. Any of you, we do have a mic, a traveling mic somewhere.
There.
There it is. Julius, did you want to start out the questions? And then you're going to be
Is it on?
next.
Yes,
Yep.
it is on. Okay. I just have a quick question. You know, when we were working in Slovakia in the mid-90s, the business program, as you mentioned, Mike, was originally oriented around doing business. We quickly realized that we weren't going to be able to change doing business, not as Peace Corps volunteers. And when we found that there were organizations out there, NGOs, that needed the kind of help that volunteers particularly were adept at, young people with the naivete, but with a lot of education, knowing how to communicate, knowing how to write letters, knowing how to network, knowing how to put together an agenda. These were the kinds of things that we were really hoping that you would be able to help these nascent organizations, which for the first time were beginning to do things on their own for themselves, but didn't necessarily know how to manage that. And I think the volunteers, where they were successful, were quite successful in doing something like that. And Lenka, you pointed out something that I think was very important, which was going from competition to coalition. I think that in the 90s, under the Mečiar government, that was actually a very good thing for Slovakia because there was a good deal of suppression, and that kind of adverse situation made the NGOs work together closely. Afterwards, when things got better and people were able to manage themselves, donor money started going to other countries that had more immediate issues. Donors also had changing ideas about what they wanted to give money for. Could you talk a little bit about what has happened with NGOs, particularly in Slovakia, but what you can see happening in Slovakia and in some of these other countries as times are changing, direction of money is going, and the important thing that you also brought up, which is making these NGOs really Slovak or really rooted in the particular country and getting your financing from there. And dealing with the kind of competition then that the NGOs have come back to.
I will try, and I will have Philippe to add whatever he sees from the big picture of the governmental senior advisor. But already as you were talking, I wanted to mention that we have American companies which have been helping with Roma, and I would like to point out the case of US Steel, which have been employing Roma people and essentially providing the best examples to the Roma communities with 100% unemployment. And what's very interesting about the US Steel was that they went to the communities, talked to the church leaders, and trying to identify the Roma who would be able to keep the job. They are in Košice, which has high unemployment, and it hasn't been easy to keep the Roma people on the staff when next to them were guys whose brothers and sisters were unemployed. So huge credit to US Steel for this kind of a work. On the financial issue, we have the 2% tax assignation where the corporations can provide money to the NGOs, and we have been already in 1997 starting realizing that the funds will be gone, the donor funds, the governmental agencies. That's why we started with corporate philanthropy. And I can say that today we really replaced the money which we were regranting from USAID, from foreign donors, with the money from Slovakia. But it's also thanks to the 2% tax assignation. It's the money which is entrusted to us in the forms of corporate funds. And we have been able over the 7 years to do some very nice projects, but it's work with companies, and it's kind of a long run because the companies don't understand immediately the role of public policy institutes, the role of advocacy organizations, the watchdog organizations. So it's completely different kind of an enemy than working with enlightened donors of NED or Rockefeller Brothers Trust or Mott Foundation. So that's the kind of a challenge. But the good news in that is that we have been able to really do some nice projects. We have been able to measure their results. The companies are talking, they're on this kind of a pyramid where they are willing to talk about the impact, but also about the change, how they are actually moving in very specific issues. It is the issue of hearing impaired people, and we are then continuing avoiding these corporations, and this really works. And I haven't believed, 15 years ago, that the companies will be fighting among each other who is really better in philanthropy, who is really better, in serving their customers, who is better, in their employment policies. So this is really a wonderful example. And today we have the companies and the corporate volunteers helping not only manually, but we created a group which is called Heads Are Helping. So we are actually using people from corporations to continue working with the NGOs, and I'm also happy to say that we are cooperating with the PILI organization, which is the public lawyers group here in the United States, started with the help of Ford Foundation, also a donor 20 years ago in Slovakia, and we have 90 lawyers and advocates sign up to work specifically with watchdog organizations, the organization checking on corruption, on transparency, and we will be launching this initiative with the assistance of the Ministry of Justice, actually the Friday when I come back. So this is, I don't know.
Just a short response to what you just said. I will start when I ended up. I mean, you have to really change the people's mind. I mean, diversifying the portfolio of funders is something what is about people feeling that I have to contribute also. Because before it was the government who took control, but also care of you. I mean, it was easy. But now I will come back to the Roma community that you described. And the hardest lesson to learn from a Roma is because he is always getting something, is to learn him that he has to give. Even he's very poor, he has to give. And when you start to learn these kind of lessons, then they shift suddenly the view as they see when they are receiving anything from the community, from outside. And that is something, I will give you a small example what we did with Children's Hour. It was a very simple idea. We asked for the last salary in the millennium. It was, 55 crowns, it's $2. It was not much, it was 1 hour salary. And in Slovakia at that time there were no checks, there were not, I mean, you had to go to the post office, wait the line, and get, the $2 to somebody else. I mean, no way. Everybody's telling us there is no chance, you will fail, just forget it. We signed a contract with 250 companies that they will subtract the money from the salaries, and got 250,000 people sign up and got our 13 million crowns in that one campaign. And that is continuing until now. And that was just a simple idea coming and just not listening to everybody saying like this will fail, we can do it, we did it. But you suddenly shifted the mind of the people that, okay, who cares about 1 hour salary? And suddenly they started to contribute. And it was individual giving. It was first campaign about individual giving in Slovakia.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was not just the government money, not just the funders, all the big funders who were there, like Kennedy, like Rockefeller, I mean, all the big guys. But there was the Slovaks who were giving.
Yeah,
And they started to believe, okay, we can do it.
it's a great example.
And if I can just give also one more example actually on this individual philanthropy. We last year started for the first time really this portal, it's called Great Country, where also we are trying to make citizens responsible for making Slovakia a better country in educational field, in the field of solidarity, in the field of culture, in the field of social affairs. And we were very surprised, how educated some of the Slovak citizens already are, because we had also the projects on Roma there. We had also projects on refugees, on abused women, and some of those projects were funded among the first. The site is not in English, but hopefully, it will be next year. So this might be one of the ways, like how you can stay connected also with the causes in Slovakia that have been to some of you still dear.
That's great. What, another question?
Joe has.
Joe, did you have one?
Igor, the Romas are behind other Slovaks, and it's either environment or that they're from birth, that they cannot be changed. And I'm convinced that it's just environment. You're working to train them, to educate them, and they are moving up in journalism and other fields that I've witnessed. But yet, in my visits to Slovakia, and I've talked to Slovak government leaders, they think that they are untrainable because they're born this way and that cannot change. In fact, they make a lot of jokes out of it, and they're very open about it's impossible. What is your feeling, or is it changing now that the government, top government leaders' attitude toward the education of Romas, or changing this environment in time?
I would say, I mean, the key is engagement. I don't think people are born that way. I wasn't certainly born to go to school and get a master's degree. I did that through effort and through, through support. I think providing them the opportunity and telling them they have to be involved halfway, like Phillips was saying. They have to contribute in some ways. They've always been on the receiving end of giving. And then what that creates, it creates a resentment from the people that keep giving, and also creates a resentment from the people that are receiving. And so, you have this relationship where it just keeps deepening and deepening, without true collaboration between the sides. I mean, if you have a Slovak organization that goes into a Roma village, or 2 or 3 villages, I am sure you can identify people that are bright, that are motivated, that are passionate, and that want to A, get an education, B, get a job, C, help their community, and be leaders in that community. You will find those people. It just, how do you do that? Who does that? Who goes out there and does that? How often do you do it? How long do you stick around there?
What's the feeling of the government leaders? Do they feel it's possible to change these people?
I don't know if the government can have an opinion of changing these people. You can't just put it theoretically as these people can or cannot be changed. You have to get involved with them. If you see them behind the fence all the time, then they can't change, can they?
If I just can, one example, recently in Slovakia there has been sort of it started as a scandal of one famous actress talking with her friend and being taped and talking about the Roma and just saying, how is it possible? You are working, I am working, and they are not working. They should work as well. And what was very interesting, it went on Facebook, and then a friend of ours who has worked also with us on this Rock the Vote campaign used it as a campaign and actually added one more, completed the sentence and made it as a campaign for Wild Poppy Seeds. It's an organization which works with talented Roma kids who are singers. So essentially, there were huge billboards in Slovakia which said they should start to work, and then 3 dots on their talent. And it has been wonderful. It brought a great excitement to the community, I think. And this is, again, what Wendy said. This is something how you turn and how you move into this optimism and this positive thinking and show that something is possible. And we had them actually in our Via Bona celebration with around 250 corporate members. And I'm sure that they will be invited to other events as well, because they are incredibly talented. Incredibly. It's like it just puts you down to the seat, with complete disbelief that something this wonderful is possible. And not because it's those are Roma, but just as such, because they have such strong, wonderful, talented voices.
Can I just make one
And then
comment
one more.
on that, which is, we were talking earlier, I think everybody can hear me.
Get rid of this.
We were talking earlier about issues of trust, long-term engagement, on-site, and it's not over yet, and it takes generations. And I think one of the things that Igor was particularly good at was getting in there and winning people's trust. And you don't win people's trust by doing something from one day to the next, or driving in a Land Rover and then driving out and leaving money. Somehow there has to be an engagement. I know that when I worked with some of my colleagues and brought them into Roma communities for the first time, who are Slovaks, they said, on the street, we instantly feel tension between us in public. The first time I went into a Roma settlement, I realized that tension wasn't there because they weren't meeting lots of Slovaks. I was in their milieu. They were reacting with each other as normal human beings, albeit in a very difficult situation. And I think until something like Peace Corps, where people actually spend time and earn trust, then you can build on that and move forward. But perhaps without that kind of trust, we can't do it.
So is there any consideration of a Slovak Peace Corps or perhaps a Central European Peace Corps?
And can we get them to come to America?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think me personally, I would go for it immediately. That is my just thing as a human being. But you know, right now, why I said we are now adopting the new legislation is kind of a door opener to these kind of ideas, because you know, at the beginning you just have to, I mean, the system is a little bit different than here in the US. We have to first adopt the laws and then we can bring the issue to the table, to the government. And I think this is happening right now. I mean, we are now starting to discuss, you know, what it means to have volunteers in the country. It's the official status of a person who can be part of the organization. And then the next step is about, you know, guys, how can we finance this whole idea in the future? And there's a part what would be coming up as a discussion when the law is adopted. That is just, you know.
Yeah, we have a platform of NGOs which are working abroad, and it hasn't been called Peace Corps, but there have been volunteers within these organizations who are in South Sudan or who have been in Afghanistan. But it would be, you know, it would be definitely wonderful to put it a brand, you know, Peace Corps, because, and also use the legislation which will be, you know, just helping with that, creating the infrastructure. Because we realize, you know, the same way, you know, like you have done, that we cannot do these projects unless we have long-term people, yeah, based there and working with them, that we cannot just parachute and go and just, it's also not cost-effective.
I think that's a perfect ending point for this conversation. I want to thank all of you. I'm going to just do a really quick wrap-up like I did last time. We started out with Mike, who shared his Peace Corps story and talked about, I loved your summertime caffeine scene and, you know, your discussion of the cognitive dissonance between that and then the authoritarian headlines. And that's where you sort of got the notion of engaging youth in a more of a proactive Western democracy type movement, and that was where Rock the Vote was born in Slovakia. And then you offered several lessons to us. First was bringing the value of being American and having the ideas and tools that Americans have. But what was really key was in the adaptation of that to the Slavic environment. You know, and then you talked about how we in America think of voting as an individual act, and what was really powerful in Slovakia was that you were able to harness a movement, and really the collective action of many votes together really was what inspired this incredible movement of young people for a collective vote. And you mentioned the term having a social contract as a vehicle for instituting change. So I think that was a really important lesson. The second thing that you brought up and continued to be a theme throughout our panel was the idea that naivete is not a bad thing. And that many of us, if we thought too hard about something, we'd never embark on it. But the importance of just doing it, and that was something that came in from our, Wendy mentioned that as one of her themes. And then the third thing was the importance of partnerships. You talked about being in the right place at the right time. And just how a sense of vibrancy and purpose fueled the movement. But as more and more people got involved, it was the self-reliance and the confidence that people themselves developed. And this is a theme that we talked about later on in the panel. Lenka, you mentioned again the naivety theme and the crazy optimism which permitted people to say yes. You talked about how the free space of the United States was important even before the Velvet Revolution, and now it's Slovakia's time to be free space for Belarus and other countries. And you mentioned really a poignant story of individuals who are working with the Cuban wives of dissidents and how important that is on an individual level, and it's one way of Slovakia being able to give back to other countries. You mentioned two two lessons as well. One was around the issue of public policies, engaging people who have real strength in particular areas, such as starting new policy environments, writing new legislation, being involved in working with other countries to help their nascent democracies as legislations are being written and new constitutions are being developed. And the importance of coalitions coming together to work for common good, sort of the competition to coalition aspect of the work. And then the second lesson that you learned was around volunteerism, creating the first volunteer activities. You know, it was hard to get 100 people, and now it's just a great testimony that for your 50th anniversary of our town in June, you're going to be able to mobilize 4,000 people, and just what an amazing testimony that is to the growth of volunteerism over the last 20 years in Slovakia. And then the third thing you mentioned, which I was really glad that you brought up, was the whole issue of public-private partnership and the role of the Slovak government and Microsoft in helping schools with learning, IT learning in Africa. But just, and the public-private partnership came up again later on in our conversation, so I'm going to mention that in just a minute. Igor mentioned, of course, working with the Roma population, people who are living on the fringes of society. In many cases, it's not so different with the Slavic people in the beginning of the Velvet Revolution, perhaps living very much at the outskirts of their own country's experience. Again, the theme of naivete, being there, trust, being there with the people and trust growing as you help them. I liked you said something about the passion and drive for working with the Roma and being intentional was really important, that people had a passion for the work that they're doing and that they had a plan and they were intentional about moving forward. I think one of the really important things that you said is the importance, and this came out again in the question and answer period of time, about how important it was for people to own their own future. That it's, you know, it's possible for someone from the outside to be a catalyst, but what's really important is when the Roma people started seeing that they could do it themselves. And that's when the growth and the change really occurs, is when people start to own it themselves. And this is something that came out a little bit later. And then another key issue that you raised, and this is something that I raised, that actually Wendy raised privately to me after the first panel was done, was just the importance of identifying people with potential. That there are people who have a spark, people who are at the right place in the right time, but have the je ne sais quoi that is needed right for that time and that place, and the importance of the donors and the NGO communities and Peace Corps volunteers to be able to identify those people and to nurture them, because they are the future, and many times they're young people. But to work with people who have that spark and help them to develop their own potential, and in doing so will lift their whole community. And then, Philippe, you did a really wonderful job of wrapping things up. You talked about the importance of changing perceptions, about how volunteerism was really crucial to changing that perception process. You talked about the difference between a welfare state, you know, under the communist government, where people just sort of were on the recipient end. You talked about the Roma being the same way, and how important individual action and people seeing that they themselves could change their future, that they themselves could take hold of their future and make a difference. And one of the examples you gave was with individual philanthropy. You know, instead of just relying on donors or other people to contribute, people were saying, I can do this now. I can donate a small amount of money, but it can contribute to a larger collective action. And again, that's when like you brought in the issue of the public-private partnership, about how that's really changing the future in Slovakia. You mentioned the 2% tax designation, which actually hadn't come up before, but is really an important innovation, I think, where companies are able to work with NGOs to address really serious issues like unemployment and some other issues that are difficult for individuals to handle, and it has created a nice source of revenue for NGOs and for community groups and I think it's an incredibly innovative idea. Wish that our government would consider such a model. And I loved your example of they should start to work ... on their talent, again with the idea of individual initiative. So the importance of engagement and providing opportunities led by the government, which I think is something that we want to reinforce. In Slovakia, the government has been as much of a leader as the private sector once they developed. I mean, the civil society and the private sector. Again, just finalizing, Julius mentioned the importance of long-term engagement and trust, getting there with the people. That's what Peace Corps is all about, is being there with the people. Slovak Peace Corps, I think it's a wonderful idea. Come to America? Yeah, we could use you. You know, we've talked about the fact that maybe Peace Corps should be two ways, so that might be something to discuss in the future. And I just want to end with a thought. You know, the issue of naivete is really interesting, because what it suggests is that there are no boundaries. If we're naive, then we don't put false boundaries around ourselves. And Sergeant Shriver speaks about in the very beginning of Peace Corps, when it was really accused of being a naive organization. And he tells a story that he accused his brother-in-law, John F. Kennedy, of selecting him as the first Peace Corps director, with the idea that it would be easier to fire a family member than a political appointee if the Peace Corps thing didn't work out. Well, here we are at 50 years celebrating our naivete. And we're just so delighted to be here with all of you. And thank you that you've given up your afternoon. But more than anything, we thank you for your commitment, for your service, and for the real shining example that you have given not only Slovakia but the world. So thank you so much.